Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 common mistakes that business owners make when trying to sell their business without an M&A advisor or investment banker present. And so this is an often situation that I see. In my day job, I'm a Canadian investment banker focused on the lower to mid-market space. And I would say maybe 15 to 20% of the time, I get introduced to situations where a seller has tried to sell the business without an advisor present. It has failed, and then they realize that they need to retain an advisor, and then we come into that process. So I do see these types of situations often, and so there are a few common mistakes that I see owners make when trying to do it by themselves. Now, just as a quick background, an M&A deal is a lot of work. On average, it takes about 6 to 12 months to close a deal. And, I would always recommend that you retain an M&A advisor rather than do it by yourself. But sometimes, owners simply choose out of being cost conscious or not wanting to pay fees, or, they don't really want to invest the time required to go through a full M&A process. They prefer to just do it direct themselves and reach out to that preferred buyer and try to make it work. And now, is that the best approach? It depends. I'm not saying that every single time it's the wrong approach, but in general, it's probably better to retain an advisor because that advisor's there. They've walked the path before. They're able to manage the ups and the downs and the emotional burden that comes with selling your business. Hopefully, they're good enough to create a competitive market to bring multiple offers to the table, and they're also there simply to do the grunt work, to really help you organize your information. Manage that information flow between the seller and the buyer, and especially once an offer is on the table, that's usually the hardest point in the process where there's a lot of information requests, and so having someone there beside you to walk that path down with you is important. But again, the whole point of this video is, say, for example, you are a solo seller and you are considering selling your business by yourself. What are the things that you want to avoid? And there are 5 common mistakes that I see. Number one, this is a biggie, sharing way too much information. So for most business owners, due to a lack of experience, they oftentimes have a very poor understanding of what information should be shared at what stage in the M&A process. And so what I often see is that buyers will continue to ask for more and more information to continue analyzing the opportunity and making a decision prior to submitting any sort of offer to show their level of commitment. And by the end of the maybe that buyer walks away and the owner has shared way too much information. And so I've come into situations where they've shared the customer list, they've shared the employee list, compensation details, all of these like critical business information without the buyer ever even putting in an offer to confirm their level of seriousness. So it's really important as a seller, if you are going to start talking to a buyer, to understand what do you share pre an offer and post an offer. Because what you really want to do is you want to make sure that they're serious enough before you continue feeding them more and more information to protect yourself against any kind of tire kickers or buyers that are simply looking under the hood to gain competitive information for their own sake and had no real interest in buying your business. And that happens often, unfortunately. There are a few buyers that are cunning and you will use M&A to gain competitive information rather than actually going through and buying businesses. So really, from your perspective, there are 2 things you need to focus on, and I kind of segmented them here. So on the left-hand side, what is information that should be not shared before an LOI or a level of seriousness and commitment is shown from the buyer side to the seller? The first thing is customer supplier names. You want to make sure you're not giving away a customer list. You're not giving away the names of those customers. And you're not giving away a lot of detail around those customers, around margins and pricing. That should not be shared. Employee names and compensation details. So if you have a really good general manager and he or she makes $120,000 and has a bonus plan of X and Y and Z, well, you don't want to give that away. That is, your retention plan around key important assets of that business. And so before an offer, you should not disclose any employee names or compensation details. Now, you can mention you have a good general manager and you can kind of describe the organizational chart of that business, but giving compensation details prior to an offer, it usually is a little too risky. As well, details on special terms like customer rebates, supplier rebates. Again, maybe that buyer is in the same space, has a similar supplier, but you're getting a 1.5% rebate from your supplier and they're only getting 0.75%. Well, now you've given them an edge to go back to their supplier and already pick up that rebate without ever buying you. And so, those are kind of the things where, again, if there's something really unique about your business, you only want to do a surface level type commentary and overview, but giving the details prior to an offer just doesn't make sense. Now, the other thing I would mention as well, if a buyer asks for them to meet with your employees or with your key staff before and after, that I would say that's a no. In most instances in our processes, we don't have buyer employee meetings until after the closing or very close to the closing, where we're in escrow, they've incurred significant professional fees, and there's a purchase and sale agreement signed or close to being signed. So if someone's asking to already meet your employees prior to even putting an offer in and saying, well, I'm going to be working with them, so I need to meet them, that's not how it works. And you could do more harm than good because you could spook the employees. So really, when you think about how to manage communication, you go over here to the right, the prior to an offer being made, you want to give them high level information on your financials. So you can give them the accountant prepared financials and normalizations on your adjusted EBITDA, a no name breakdown of your top 10 customers and suppliers. So you blank them out. You either cross them out or you say customer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, et cetera. And, it has the annual purchases beside those customers and nothing else. Margin, pricing details, leave that to post offer. Details on your product categories, that should be really high level. If you have 3 service lines or you sell 10 products, kind of breaking down the product SKU information is helpful for a buyer and is fair to share prior to, but actually sharing the type of SKUs that a customer is buying is probably a little too specific. And I already mentioned this, org chart and commentary on your key employees is appropriate, but compensation details on their names is not. And then as well, you can share an equipment list if you're more of an asset heavy type business, and you can do a discrete tour of the facility in the office, but no meetings with employees yet. Once the offer is submitted and you approve that offer and you sign back that offer, only then should you really be opening up customer names and supplier names, showing contracts, talking more specifics about employees and retention, showing the contracts behind certain agreements, and all of those things. Those are more specifics that should not be done pre-offer. And you cannot imagine how many times I'll come across situations where business owners have overshared because what ends up happening is that, you're talking to a buyer for 6 months and it feels like it's taking forever. And every 2 weeks they ask for more and more and more information. And that dribble of information, when you look back at it, you're like, whoa, I shared way too much there. By this point, you should have made an offer if you were really serious enough. So you need to make sure to cut them off before they just keep dragging on the process and taking more information from you. Now, the second mistake relates to confidentiality, and there are a few confidentiality mistakes that I see. But ultimately, when you're dealing with a buyer, I would say most instances I come across situations where a solo seller knows the buyer that they're dealing with. It's the person that's been nagging them. Oh, when you want to sell your business, come reach out to me. Or maybe it's a family member, or maybe it's a colleague that you're very close to. So you kind of let your guard down, but it's critical to protect and have very consistent rules around confidentiality, regardless of if they're the perfect buyer, a really good fit, or they're my friend or my buddy. It doesn't really matter. There has to be clear confidentiality rules because from the buyer's point of view, there's no real repercussions to them potentially causing a leak. But from your perspective as a seller, if your management team finds out, if your customers find out, that could potentially hurt the value of your business significantly. So you need to continue to approach it in a professional manner. So the first thing I would say is, and this happens often is, so you want to sell your business, you have the perfect buyer in mind. And so the question is, how do I go to that buyer and actually tell them that I want to sell without saying I'm for sale? So there are 2 different approaches. Now, if the buyer approaches you and says, hey, listen, are you thinking about selling, blah, 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 they kind of initiate that topic. At that point in time, instead of cutting them off and saying, no, I'm not for sale, and instead of saying, yes, I'm for sale, which is a clear signal, what you say is kind of the middle. And I always use this line in my business as well. I'm always for sale at the right price, because it's a really great way to say, I'm not for sale, but I'm not for sale. Let's talk. And so, that kind of vagueness protects you from a potential leak where, imagine you were at a trade show conference and someone overheard you, I'm for sale at the right price. It doesn't communicate to the marketplace that you're actually wanting to sell right now, but that you would consider an option. And the reality is you will. even though you want to sell, you're giving them that indication that, hey, if you're serious enough, I'll consider it. And that's really the way you should answer if a buyer approaches you. Now, the flip side is, say, for example, no buyer is knocking on your door and you want to approach that perfect buyer, the person that you think is perfect for your business. How do you initiate that conversation? Well, the way I do it, it's no different than the way I manage conversations for my clients. What I do is I pick up the phone and I don't call them and start talking about my client right away. What I do is I start asking about their business first. Hey, what are you looking to do? Are you looking to sell? Are you looking to grow? What's your mind headspace at? Because imagine you ask them, are you looking for sale to sell? And they're like, yeah, I'm looking to sell. Well, if you gave away that you were looking to sell, it was pointless because they're looking to sell, right? So you kind of want to cover off your bases first and go down the list. So almost be a little bit more direct in saying, hey, what are you looking for? And if they're saying, no, I don't want to sell, I want to grow. Like I'm in it for the long haul. You then can start alluding to the fact, hey, listen, I'm getting older. My kids are not interested in the business. I don't really have any good middle management that want to take this company over. I'm thinking about doing something. And, just that, now that you've confirmed that they're looking to grow, you've thrown the line in the water and you can let them bite. And either, if they don't bite, then you can slow down that conversation. But if they bite, then you can move towards, hey, listen, let's get an NDA in place and let's have a more concrete discussion because I'm thinking about selling. And that way you don't come off as desperate and you're managing that message and protecting against a potential situation where you go to the buyer that you think is a perfect buyer, but the reality is they're not in the space, in the mind space to actually buy your business. Okay. So now the second point here is, ensure that every single buyer that you talk to, so long as, you indicate that you're for sale, the moment that they know that, make sure to get an NDA signed. So a confidentiality agreement that's prepared by an M&A lawyer. I've often seen business owners use their family law lawyer or their real estate lawyer, and the real estate lawyer will use the real estate confidentiality agreement, which again differs from what type of NDA agreement you want in place for an M&A deal. So use an M&A lawyer to draft that confidentiality agreement. And I would say if someone else has a confidentiality agreement that they're pushing on you, always try to use yours, because you can control the language a lot better and you can have your lawyer prepare it, which typically is more, again, more defensive and protective of yourself. Now, the third point is the moment that someone's indicated, they're interested in buying you, don't be afraid. This is something that I ask in my day-to-day business, and you should as well. It's no different. Don't be afraid to ask for info from that buyer to pre-qualify them. Say, oh, you're interested in me? Oh, that's great. Listen, I'm thinking about doing something, but I just want to understand, like, if this is going to be a fit. Maybe I'm a little too big or too small for you. How much in revenues do you do? What's kind of your, just guesstimate your annual profit? How many employees do you have? How big is your facility? Kind of grab some more information, and you can easily kind of figure out, are they similar in size? Are they bigger than you? Are they smaller than you? Because if they're smaller than you, and it seems like they've been growing significantly and maybe they have some bank debt there, like how are they going to really afford you? And put that to them. You can even say, hold on a second, like it sounds like you're a little smaller than me, like how are you going to afford an acquisition like mine? Like how are you going to finance it? Like, do you have capital? Do you have investors? Put those tough questions and start pre-qualifying the buyer, because it goes back to the mistake number one, which is you're sharing too much information without actually even confirming if they're serious enough. And so the first step that you should do the moment you've signed that NDA is start grabbing information. It's a two-way street. They're going to start asking for those financial data, and you're going to start asking for their ability to actually buy you. And don't forget that. Now, site visits are usually required, and it's a standard step in the due diligence process. So, when someone asks, hey, listen, I want to tour your business, there's a few things I always recommend. Number one, try to do it after hours, not in front of employees, because, employees, whether they've worked at someone else's place, and maybe they've worked at that, that person's place before, and they're like, oh, that's my old boss. Why is he here? So, you want to make sure that you're reducing the potential for employees to connect the dots. You can also ask the buyer to dress down, so that, say, for example, they are coming during business hours or there are still employees hanging around in the night shift. Instead of them showing up in a suit and a tie and sticking out like a sore thumb, show up in jeans and a shirt. Dress down so that, they don't stick out when they're doing that tour. Now, if there are in-person meetings, don't host those in-person meetings. Try not to host those in-person meetings in your office building or at your place of business, because they may bring in lawyers, they may bring in advisors, and all of a sudden you have 5 or 6 people walking in with suitcases and the suits, and it starts dragging too much attention towards you. So if you can try to host it off site. And it's also a lot more relaxing because you, as the seller, you're separated from the business. So you don't have that potential distraction of an employee walking into the room and saying, "Hey boss, can you do something?" Or "I got a quick question." And it kind of takes you away from the conversation. You're focused, you're present, you're separated physically away from the business, and you're focused in the moment. So I always recommend, to reduce the potential leaks, host meetings off-site if possible, or via Zoom or call, and take those calls at home so that people can't hear through the walls what you're talking about. And then, I've already mentioned this point. Without a signed offer, buyers may say, "Hey, listen, like, oh, can I go talk to that employer? Or can I go meet with your general manager?" All that. Really restrict those meetings until after an offer is signed and there's concrete, proven seriousness that they're real and that they're going to follow through with the deal. Because the last thing you want to do is to bring a buyer, put him in front of an employee, and then start causing that employee grief over, "Wow, he's thinking about selling the business. Like, what am I going to do? Like, am I out of a job? Like, now my favor and my seniority maybe is at risk. I may think about switching jobs," which ultimately, if you have a key employee leaving, that lowers the value of your business significantly. Okay. So number 3, this is a biggie. They all are. But mistake number 3 is getting lost in the details. And so I look at this in 2 ways. So number 1, selling a business is a lot of work. And one of the hardest parts of the process is actually after the offer is signed and you're in due diligence. Because once you're in due diligence, there's bankers, lawyers, investors, the management team of the buyer. They're all coming in asking for different bits of information: legal, admin, finance, operational information. They're just all taking that from you. And so, you as a seller, you want to provide that, and you want, you obviously want to fulfill those requests, but it becomes quite overwhelming. And so what ends up happening is that, solo sellers get dragged into the closing process and start taking their eye off the ball in the day-to-day business. All of a sudden they don't call on customers as much. They're not pushing their management team to, maintain the business or tracking KPIs as much. They're letting, issues slip, production, service. They're so focused on the deal closing and on supplying that information that the management team is bringing up these issues. And he's like, "Well, no, you handle it. You handle it." And then you keep delegating and you over delegate. And all of a sudden the business starts to slip and earnings, start going down, and there's underperformance in the business. And the challenge with that is the moment that a buyer sees underperformance, they get spooked. And all of a sudden, what you promised me isn't here. What's going on? Wait, I thought I was buying X amount of profit and now it's lower. So a slip in interim business performance is the kiss of death in the M&A deals. Now, I'm not saying it's dead, because ultimately you can talk your way around it and maybe structure the deal. But most buyers are going to look at underperformance, and regardless of what you did in the last 3 years, if you're starting to trend down as you're in the closing process, buyers are going to push to either renegotiate the price lower or walk away from the deal because they're too spooked. So, in that situation, imagine that all of a sudden buyer's gone to you and said, "Hey, you're underperforming. You didn't promise what you said you would." All of a sudden the business isn't doing as much. And the seller, and I've seen this a few times, is like, "Hold on a second. The reason why I'm doing that is because I'm answering all these damn questions you're giving to me, and I can't focus on my business. It's your fault. I'm so focused on closing this deal for you to help you get all this information that, my business is suffering. I've taken my eye off the ball." So again, obviously the easiest mitigant to this risk is to hire an advisor so that you don't get dragged too much into this process. But if you're doing this, it's critical to set boundaries and to allocate time appropriately to the business. Make sure to maintain its performance, because the moment it goes down, it's a tough conversation and it derails a lot of deals. Now, the flip side is that, the other thing, funny enough, we just got a lead like 3 weeks ago, as I'm recording this video, this manufacturing client, owner comes in and is just like, "Oh, listen, like I was like 5 hours away from a deal closing, the day of closing, and they're still negotiating my employment contract. And you know what? They just had these 2 points that just drove me crazy. And I killed it. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm walking away from this." Now, That happens often. And again, it's that tension between the buyer and the seller. When you're trying to negotiate directly with the buyer's going to do buyer things. That's what I say all the time. They're a buyer. They're going to grind you down. They're going to push. They're going to see what they can get from you because that's what they're trying to do. They're buying businesses all the time. They're used to doing this. But from the seller's point of view, when they look at this and they say, you're taking away from me, it's that emotional reaction to, all of a sudden, like you're grabbing things that were supposed to be mine, or I feel that are mine, and like I'm getting sucked into this. So I see this often is that yes, there are advisors around the table like lawyers, but lawyers are going to say, hey, this is here are your options, here are the risks associated with each of those options, but they're not going to make decisions for you. So when there are solo sellers, what ends up happening is that they get so involved in negotiating all these contracts that they lose sight of the grander goal, which is to exit the business, sell it at a good valuation, and move on in a smooth transition. And I was amazed. It was a $20 million deal, great purchase price. He walks away from it because of two clauses in his employment agreement. But again, that's the challenge. When you're going through a 12-month M&A process, you're doing it alone, you're spending all of this time, you're burnt out at the end. Those two small points seem like the end of the world to that person from their perspective. But the reality is all that really happened is they got lost in the details. So really, I always go back to when you're looking at these agreements, rental agreements, employment contracts, and negotiating working capital, things that come after the offer is signed and negotiated, those are the smaller issues that, again, they're critical, but you need to make sure that you take them in the grand scheme of things, because sometimes you have to give on some agreements to get on some agreements. If you got a really good purchase price, maybe you give a little bit on these other agreements because, hey, I'm getting a really good purchase price here. And so you need to be holistically thinking about the grander image instead of getting lost in the really minutia of each detailed agreement. So mistake number 4 is working with only one buyer. And so oftentimes, due to the work involved in managing multiple conversations with buyers or running a full auction, sellers will typically prefer to just work with their one preferred buyer. Usually a competitor down the street or someone that they've always kept in touch with at trade show conferences. And so what they do is they say, you know what, listen, it's easier for me to just go to that person. I know that they're going to pay the most, or it's the perfect fit. Like our organizations are identical. Let me pick up the phone and call that person and only work with that person. But the challenge with that is that it really limits your ability to negotiate. It limits your ability to understand how the market views your business from a valuation perspective. And ultimately, each buyer is going to look at that deal differently. So, say for example, you want one structure and you go and talk to that buyer and they present a completely different structure, it's hard to really move them off that structure. Whereas if you were talking to 10, 20, 30 buyers, all of a sudden you have the flexibility to deal with different groups because each group is going to approach the deal in a different way. So I'm not suggesting you go talk to 10, 20, 30 buyers because that's what an M&A advisor does. But if you wanted to do it yourself, at least you should have 3 to 5 serious qualified buyers that are interested in buying your business and that, are really pushing towards submitting an offer. Because if you have, 3 offers in hand, that's enough for you to pivot and really understand, okay, what are the common themes across the offers? Do they all view my valuation similarly? Is the purchase structure the same, or is one giving me more VTB and a higher price and the other's more giving more all cash? Does one person want to buy my real estate and the business and the other one wants to lease it? You have flexibility to kind of decide, hey, what do I want? What works best for my personal situation? And every situation for every one of my clients is different. It's amazing. And one of the things I always say is that as you get more offers, as you talk to more buyers, you get better clarity as to what you want. It's funny, like we'll sign a client up and they'll say, listen, I want X, Y, and Z. And we'll go through the process. We'll meet, the groups. We'll go get the offers. We'll go. And then 3 months later, their wants are so different from what they initially stated they were. And it always happens because clients, start realizing, whoa, I have this option and this option. I can do this and this. And, I really like working with this person and I could see myself actually staying on. And, there are all these different kind of thoughts that come up throughout the process. But that's because, you're exposed to multiple buyers. So don't limit yourself to dealing with only one party, because then all of a sudden you don't have that ability to really broaden your horizons and better understand what you really want or need. Okay. Now, the last mistake, and this is something that I commonly see for any sale. It could be selling by yourself, it could be selling with an advisor. It's just it's a mistake in general, but it's something that we very much focus on in our day-to-day business. We do not take on a client. We do not sign up a client without making sure that we're aligned on what they want for the business. It is absolutely killer if you don't have an understanding of what you want for the business or what your business is worth and what you're comfortable in accepting. If you go into an M&A process, regardless of if you're doing it alone or with an advisor, it is going to get messy and you're going to waste time, and you could potentially put at risk the entire deal and make buyers walk away. So it's really critical that you have a good understanding of what your business is worth. And so I see two instances that come up when sellers are trying to do it by themselves. One, they either have a really high valuation and believe their business is worth more than it actually is in the open marketplace. And they've gotten this indication from talking to other people, hearing the cocktail multiples. You're at a trade show conference and that one guy's like, oh, I sold my business for 25 times EBITDA. And it's like, yeah, maybe they actually did, but there was tons of structure and earnouts and all that. And there's a lot of details that are hidden behind that term 25 times EBITDA that don't really get communicated when you're chatting, and trying to josh around with your competitors, right? So, that person doesn't have a very clear view of their business, but they think it's worth a lot more than it is. And then the flip side is sellers never done a business sale before. They have no idea how to price their business. And so ultimately they say, you know what, I'm going to go to market and let the market speak. I'm going to let the buyer submit offers for me, and then that will deem really what the business is worth. And obviously in that situation, while you may get buyers that will treat you fairly, ultimately when buyers see that there's no pricing guidance and that you're letting them set the tone of the conversation, there's this natural tendency for buyers to underbid your business or to be more aggressive in structure and ask for more vendor financing or an earnout or deferred payment terms. So in both instances, it's really important to have a clear business valuation in mind. So, just focusing quickly here on number one. So, in number one, if you think that your business is worth more than it is, and that's again influenced due to those big headlines or the bigger sales that happen in the trade magazines, and they don't really relate to the size of your business, the most important thing that you should do is you should go and actually, even if you don't want to retain an M&A advisor, go talk to a few and get them to give you business valuations. Because the funny part is a lot of these M&A advisors, they'll give you a rough indication up front and they'll say, oh, before, I even engage you, I think your business is worth, $7 to $10 million. Great. Have three of those conversations. If they all come in within 7 to 10, 7 to 8, 9 to 10, you kind of know 7 to 10 is probably the range. You've gotten multiple perspectives. And then if you really wanted to confirm, you could even pay a certified business valuator, CBV, to actually do that valuation for you and give you a full detailed report on how they came up with that valuation. But you should be talking to people that are in this space that have perspectives, have relevant perspectives on business valuation. If you go and you pick up the phone and you talk to a competitor that's in your space that hasn't sold or bought a business before, and they themselves maybe don't have that experience, I would say their opinions or the cocktail multiples that you hear are not relevant and are more dangerous than good for you. That's just the simple reality. And the challenge with that is that, A, if you think your business is worth more than it is, banks won't finance it. Like I was a banker prior to my time as an M&A advisor. I worked at Scotiabank, a big Canadian bank, and I would oftentimes, get buyers coming in asking for financing. I'd look at the deal and I'd say, man, you're paying 7 times for this. Like this thing is worth only 4. And they look at me and really? Yeah. And then they take that offer back to the seller and say, you know what, like I'm overpaying for this business. We need to renegotiate. So the banks will start pushing back the buyers and saying, whoa, you're paying too much. We don't want to finance as much. So even though, yeah, maybe you're cunning enough to get an LOI signed, if they're using bank financing to finance that purchase, oftentimes the banks or the investors themselves will harp and say, oh, you're overpaying for this business. So eventually it all comes out in the wash anyways. And someone's going to point out that that buyer is overpaying for that business, if you even get them to that point. Now, the flip side is, say, for example, you're demanding a really high number. The reputation you develop as an unrealistic seller can be also damaging. We got involved with the process where there was one client that was referred into us, And they said, you know, well, listen, we want to sell our business. You know, this is what we want. And it was about, I would say, 40% above market value. So I picked up the phone, spoke to a few of my contacts that were in the space, and they were like at a high level. Listen, you don't even need to tell us who this is. We already know who this is. We know who they are. We've tried to buy them in the past. They are unrealistic, and I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole because all I'm going to do is waste my time. Like they're going to think they're going to lead me down this path, and then at the last minute they're going to be like, no, 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 I want my original number. And then we're just going to waste our time and fees. So, you know, if all of a sudden you have this unrealistic expectation of your business value, you can also develop a negative reputation in the sector, which limits potential buyers who maybe would be really good buyers for you from dealing with you because they've heard, ooh, you're that guy. You're that person that really wants that much for their business. I don't want to deal with you and waste my time. Okay. Now, the flip side is, say, for example, you're undervaluing your business. So, again, go talk to M&A advisors, get that support. But what's really important when when you don't have a really good, clear view of your business valuation is you can do a few things. The first is, you know, prepare your own EBITDA analysis yourself. You know, oftentimes I come into situations where they don't have a clear understanding of their business value and they say, you know what, let the buyer submit an offer for me. Here, take my accountant prepared financials and you submit an offer on those. Well, hold on a second. If you're only giving them your unadjusted numbers and you're not adding back your salaries and all that, and they're kind of making those assumptions or they're running their own analysis and not sharing it with you, all of a sudden you don't have that clarity to be talking in the same terms because businesses are valued on adjusted EBITDA. And so if the buyer looks at your EBITDA and they think it's 1.5 and you internally believe it's 1.7, then put out that 1.7. Let them know, hey, I think this EBITDA is 1.7. Prove me I'm wrong. And all of a sudden, you know, you can clear up that discrepancy that comes when buyers are a little bit too conservative. And I've seen this. I've seen this often where buyers will say, "Oh, you know, I thought we needed to hire 2 employees to replace you instead of 1. Oh, that makes more sense. Okay, fine. I'll raise my offer." Because, you know, they were talking to a buyer by themselves and they couldn't clearly communicate as a seller what the true EBITDA for the buyer was. Now, the second thing, I came across a situation like 4 months ago. Seller was selling to a strategic, was trying to do it themselves, and the strategic was going to buy their customer list, buy their technicians, and then move their warehouse facility into their facility. So, you know, we look at the EBITDA and, you know, I'm helping out the accountant just for quick, rough sake. I looked at it and I said, hold on a second. They're moving the facility in there. So have you factored in the rent savings on the EBITDA for them? Oh, no, no, no. This is our EBITDA. This is with our facility. But hold on a second. The buyer said that they're going to move this business into their facility. And you're paying $150,000 in rent there. Add that back. Because for them, their EBITDA for this business is that your number plus another $150,000 in rent savings. So don't forget the rental savings or the synergies that come from a deal with that buyer. When you're dealing with that buyer, especially if they're a strategic competitor, again, it's a two-way street. Grab information from them. What do you want to do with my business? Do you think that you need the HR and the finance department or you already have people in those departments, so you're not going to need my staff, right? Boom. Those are all savings that will come from a deal. And so buyers, unless, you know, a seller's smart enough to ask, hey, what synergies are you going to get from this deal and insist on getting paid for those synergies, they'll never pay for those synergies. So don't forget to bring that up when you're having those discussions. And then the last thing is make sure to don't forget that there's value on your balance sheet. You know, buyers will buy your cash flow, but there's also corresponding value on the balance sheet. If a buyer insists on buying your cash, or buying the excess inventory, or all these additional assets that really aren't required for your business, smarten up and say, hold on a second, you don't need those assets to deliver the cash flow that you're buying. It's a cash-free, debt-free deal. So the cash on that balance sheet is mine. And so I've seen oftentimes where we come in too late into a process, an LOI is already negotiated, and the buyer was cunning enough to say, hey, listen, I'll give you your number, but then I also want $500,000 of your cash. So really the true offer is that offer minus $500,000 because in the open marketplace, most deals close cash-free, debt-free. So don't forget about the excess value on your balance sheet. And so worst case, at least bring in your accountant to tell the buyer, hey, listen, like from a balance sheet perspective, this is kind of the required working capital, and this excess working capital is the seller's and will be carved off. So those are the top 5 mistakes that, really, when you're going to sell a business, it is a lot of work. There's a lot of different moving parts. And again, I would always recommend you retain an M&A advisor. But if you're going to try to do it by yourself, at least try to build people around you that have that experience. An accountant, a proper M&A lawyer, smarten up, watch a few of these videos on Finance Kid channel, and then also take advantage of free meetings. Go talk to the M&A advisors at least and smarten up a little bit. Say, hey, what do you think my business is worth? How does the process work? How do I approach this buyer? In my sector, what do you see my multiple as being? Kind of grab some intel, and then if you want to do it yourself, do it. But again, I wouldn't recommend that you do it. So just to summarize here, the top 5 mistakes that you really want to avoid if you are selling your business by yourself. Number 1, don't overshare your information. Make sure to stage it out, understand what you want to share before an offer is made, and then beyond that information, if they're asking for more, cut them off and ask for an offer to confirm their level of seriousness. Number 2, always protect your confidentiality. If you mess around with confidentiality, it could potentially harm the value of your business. So get an NDA in place, make sure that you're not, meeting in front of employees, and, really be hard on the buyer to respect your confidentiality. Number 3, don't take your eye off the ball. If you're getting involved in negotiations, you're spending months and months during the due diligence process, great, you have to do that. It's part of the process, but don't forget about the day-to-day business, because if the slowdown happens and your results start going down, buyers have a lot of leverage over you. Either they'll walk away or they'll renegotiate. Don't approach only a single buyer. The more buyers you have, the more options you have, the more visibility and understanding you have into actually what you really want to achieve out of a business sale. And then number 5, determine your business value up front. Get a valuation. If you don't have a price in mind, in my opinion, you're not really ready for sale, because all you're really doing is you're almost kicking the tires yourself, going down the process, getting a few offers, and you're like, I don't really want this. That's too low for me. And then you kind of just kill the deal. Well, you've wasted your own time because you're trying to sell your business by yourself. So have a clear understanding up front of what you're willing to accept, what the value of your business is in the open market. And if you're too low, then either pull it off the market and hold on to it and grow it, or if you find that there's other synergies there to achieve, then spend time with the buyer, present the information very clearly, present a good EBITDA analysis, point out the synergies, and also point out the excess value on your balance sheet. Don't forget those 3 areas if you have no real clue what your business is worth. So I appreciate you guys watching this video. If you have any questions or you want to reach out, please do. You can reach out via LinkedIn, or you can go to my website at robleycapital.com. Outside of that, if there are any other comments or questions, you can also just comment below. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more videos. Thank you guys. Bye.